Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So, chapter 2, classification that we had left for later. So, it's finally later. Right, and here we learn how organisms are classified and differentiated from one to the other. They've gone into a lot of examples and explanation. Well, not so much like just to sort of clarify the concept. They've given a lot of examples, very common examples of why classification is important. So I won't be going into that. You can read it from the text, obviously. Uh, the basic underlying concept is simple, and then we'll take a look at the features of certain classes of organisms. So to start off with, right, what is a species? So a species is a group of organisms that can reproduce to produce fertile offspring, right? Fertile is very important, right? So the offspring can reproduce as well, right? This sets apart crossbreedings such as crossbreeding a lion and a tiger, right, to get a liger, or crossbreeding horses and donkeys to get mules. Those can be done, but the offspring are not fertile, right? So they're not going to be producing more offspring of their own. And so the mule or the liger is not considered a species in itself, right? But a lion and a tiger and a donkey and a horse, they are all species because horses can breed and reproduce and produce more fertile offspring, like more horses. Similarly with the rest. So, right, a group of organisms that can reproduce to have fertile offspring. And then the binomial system of naming, right? It is an internationally agreed system, and internationally agreed is important what they tell us, right? Because if we use common names vary from region to region for the same thing. And it's also possible that two different things have the same name in different regions, right? And they give an example of that. And so if scientists from different regions come together and they're using common names, it would be very confusing. Either they're using different names for the same thing, or they're using the same name for different things. Either case, it's not going to go well. And so the binomial system is an internationally agreed system. So wherever you are, if you use this naming system, the other person, if they're obviously familiar with it, they're going to get it. And so this system uh, names the organism using their genus and their species, right? So the species is the lowest category, like, of classification, and then is the genus. So the way this works is because genus is a higher category, right? You can have many different species under one genus, as we'll see, right? And so the names of organisms can be such that the genus name is similar, but the species name is different. Okay, now species over here is again by right. So whatever is given over here is they're telling you, why the scientific classification is important and all that. So you can read that. It's not important to clarifying the concept. Again, the smallest natural group of organisms is the species, and it is one that can reproduce to produce fertile offspring. Right? So members of a species often look very similar to each other in appearance, and they usually are almost identical in their anatomy, physiology, and behavior. Right? And so examples are the common manna, the eagle, the parrot, right? And obviously there are different kinds of parrots. So parrots, just saying parrot is very like a broad category. So, right, if they have similarity in their anatomy, physiology, behavior, right, then there is a likelihood that they are from the same species. Now, as far as physical looks, appearance is concerned, if humans do not intervene, if they're not involved in the breeding of animals, then right, natural selection will only produce a degree of difference in their appearance, right? But we see a lot of difference in animals. For example, cats, right? The example, or dogs, right? Uh, Dogs come mostly from the same, right? They're the same species, right? They have the same ancestor from which they are selectively bred to produce different breeds, right? So it's a breed of dog, not a, the species is the same. And similarly for cats, right? You've got the Siamese cat and the Persian and the American long hair and the British short hair and whatnot. But they're different breeds, but they're all the same species. And so you can take two very different looking cats, right? Male and female, and you can put them together and they'll breed and get offspring. And the offspring will be fertile. So that means that, right? And that's because of human involvement. Right, so humans selectively bred, selective breeding, right, is something humans do. If they see, oh, this cat has slightly longer hair than the other cat, and so we breed this cat for the long hair, and so after a number of generations we get cats that all have long hair. That might not have happened in the wild, right? But because of us selecting which cat to breed to get this new breed of cat with long hair all the time, right? So it's only its physical appearance has changed. Also similar with pigeons, right? All the different kinds of pigeons that you see, most of them like are coming from the common rock pigeon, right? The fantail and the pouter and the whatnot, right? All those pigeons have the common ancestor, like I wouldn't say ancestor, but the common root. The species is the common rock pigeon, right? Did you say something? Yeah, could you repeat what you said? I'm sorry, your voice is very much garbled. I can't make sense of it. Okay, so okay, just do humans and animals belong to the same species? They belong to the same kingdom Animalia, but that's way up, right? And animals again is like very. So no, we're not. We are the same, I believe, categorized among the same genus, not species, right? So we are Homo sapiens, right? I believe they give that in the book at some point. Just skip forward to check. Right, and so according to DNA evidence, they say, right, this is, I mean, in the broader sense, this is disputed, but this is what, right, the evolutionary theory suggests, and that's what we're taught. Okay, so what they suggested, there was a common ancestor that's now extinct, and then the other common ancestor that's now extinct, and then another common ancestor that's now extinct, and then we've got, right, and so we keep branching, and so uh, right, humans are Homo sapiens, and then chimpanzees and others are, the genus is like Homo, and then the species is different. So we're different species, which means that, you know no fertile offspring, right? But the genus is the same. So, right, different species, so the anatomy and the appearance and the physiology and the behavior is all different, right? The Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm sorry, I can't understand. If you could just type it again. People with Down syndrome do not have 48 chromosomes, they have 47 chromosomes, right? So they have, normally we have 23 pairs of chromosomes, right? People with Down syndrome have an extra chromosome. So instead of 46, they have 47, right? So they have 22 pairs and then a triplet. All right, so carrying on, closely related species are grouped into what's called a genus, right? The plural is called genre. For example, there are 45 species of bronzeback snake, and they're all put into the same genus called Dendrelaphus. Right? These names are in Latin, and so they're tricky to pronounce. Now, right, what I said about common name versus the scientific name. So, money plant is something that we're familiar with. It's also called the devil's ivy in some other region of the world. Right? So if two people meet and they talk about devil's ivy and money plant, they're talking about the same thing, but because they're not familiar of the fact that it's the same thing with two different common names, it could get confusing. And so the scientific name is Epipremnum aureum, right? And so if someone says that, they know what plant they're talking about. Okay, so that's one example. The other example is what you can see in the image over here. There's the Indian robin and then the British robin. They're both called robins. They look nothing alike, except for that they're birds, right? So if two people meet and they're talking about robins, they're obviously, right. So one's talking about the Indian robin, they're calling it robin. The other one's talking about the British robin, they're also calling it robin, and they're talking about its appearance and behavior and all of that. And they're like, "What robin are you talking about?" So, right, that's going to be problematic. Uh, right. So the Indian robin, its even its genus is different, right? Not only the species. So this is Cocycus fulicatus, and the British robin is Erithicus rubecula, right? And so not only like, so the common name can for two very different things, like not only the species but the genus itself is different. And so yeah, that, and so they also give the example of the Egyptian mongoose and the Indian gray mongoose. Now this is an example of something that belongs to the same genus but different species. So the mongoose, both these mongoose belong to the genus Herpestus, but the Egyptian one species name is Ichneumon, and the Indian one species is Edwardsi. Right? So that is for the binomial system. Now, moving on. Any questions? I'll take that as a no. Okay. So the dichotomous key. So the dichotomous key is sort of like a yes/no type of questionnaire that you develop to identify things, right? So you mention a feature and you're like, well, does this organism have this feature? Yes. Okay. We'll move on to a certain route. No. Okay. We'll move on to a different route, right? And so we start off with simple, more common features, and then become more specific to differentiate the different organisms. So for example, right, you can see over here a dichotomous key for the vertebrate class. The vertebrate class are the ones that have obviously a backbone, right? Skeletal structure and a backbone. So the first classification is, well, is it warm-blooded or cold-blooded? Right? So if it's cold-blooded, move on to category number 2. Right? Does it have fins but no limbs? It's a fish, and we've identified. But if it has 4 limbs, you move on to category number 3. Right, so if it has limbs and it's cold-blooded, if it does not have scales, it's an amphibian like a frog, right? But if it does have scales, right, along with its limbs and being cold-blooded, it's a reptile, right? So for example, like an alligator, right? Now obviously this does not include the snake, which is also a reptile, right? Because it does not have 4 limbs, right? So obviously it's not inclusive of all. Okay, now if it's warm-blooded, you move to category number 4, and then the only classification, right, which is very broad, obviously, right? Does it have feathers? It's a bird. Does it have fur? It's a mammal, right? So technically, the hair on our body as humans is remnants of evolutionary remnants of fur, right? It doesn't classify as fur, but yeah, that's what it was supposed to be, evolutionary, in the evolutionary sense. Right. Similarly, you have a dichotomous key over here for some invertebrates. So does it have legs? Okay. How many legs? More than 6. Okay. What kind of body does it have? So that's the thing you have. If it has only 6 legs, okay, does it have pincers or does it have hard wings? Right. If it doesn't have legs, is it segmented? So you got an earthworm. Segmented means you can see clear, you know, partitions of the body, so to speak, clear lines that are separating one part of the body to the other. If it's not segmented, then does it have a shell? It's a snail. If it doesn't have a shell, it's a slug. Okay. And so you need to be able to develop the skills to make simple dichotomous keys based on easily identifiable features. If you know the main characteristics of a group, it is possible to draw up a logical plan for identifying an unfamiliar organism, right? So for example, right, is it unicellular? So you're asking a question, yes, no, right? This is also the identification plan for developing a dichotomous key. Is it unicellular? Yes. Does it have a nuclear membrane? Yes. It's a protoptista, we should get into. No, it's a prokaryote, right? So like bacteria. It's not unicellular. Okay. Does it have hyphae or cells? Right? So it has hyphae, that's fungus. If it has cells, does it have chloroplast and cell wall? Yes, it's a plant. If not, it's an animal. Right? And so that is the identification plan of the different kingdoms. Right? Kingdom Animalia, Kingdom Plantae, right? Prokaryote. Over here, they're just talking about how you can use the dichotomous key to identify, or these 5 different laboratory equipment, right? And so you can take a look at this over here, right? Okay, moving on. So that's going further. Skip. All right. Features of organisms, right? So here we're talking about the animal kingdom. Well, not the animal kingdom, kingdoms, right? So all living organisms have certain features in common, including the presence of cytoplasm and cell membranes and DNA and genetic material, right? So a kingdom is a category of living organisms, right? And so it's a very broad category. So you've got the animal kingdom, and if I just zoom out and skip forward, so you have the animal kingdom, right? And so pictures of lots of animals. And so you've got arthropods and stuff, right? The animal kingdom includes insects, arachnids, crustaceans, and myriapods, right? So insects and all, they're all scientifically they're all animals, right? So the butterfly and the spider and everything else, right? They're all animals. Right, then you've got vertebrates of different types, right, in the animal kingdom. And so, right, you've got fish, amphibia, reptiles, birds, and mammals. Then they talk about the five kingdom scheme, and so that's kingdom animalia, right? So that's the animals. So previously it used to be just two kingdoms, plants and animals. But then, bacteria and other single-celled organisms and fungus, they were left out and like, okay, what do we do with this? And so right now there are animals, plants, fungus, prokaryote, and protoctist. So these are the five kingdoms, right? The very broad classification. Viruses do not fall into any one particular kingdom, right? Because they just don't have the characteristics of living organisms, other than the fact that they have genetic material and they are able to reproduce, but that also within a host, not on their own. Okay, so if I just backtrack, I'm going to, utilize the summarized table that they have over here. So it's very useful. You can obviously read the text for details. So what are the features of insects, right? They're given examples of dragonflies and wasps as insects. They have three pairs of legs, so that's 6 legs in total. Their body is divided into head, thorax, and abdomen, so there are three segments of the body, right? They have a pair of antennae, one pair of compound eyes, right? So compound eyes is something that a fly has, right? I don't know if it's very clear over here. It's not very clear, right? So they have like what we consider as one eye is actually many eyes together, right? So compound eyes, and they usually have two pairs of wings, right? So you can see over here, right? There's a larger wing and a smaller wing, right? Then you've got arachnids, which include spiders and mites. They've got four pairs of legs. The body is divided into the cephalothorax and the abdomen, so just two parts. They do not have antennae. They have several pairs of simple eyes. Right, so they've got more than two eyes, several pairs meaning two, of simple eyes. Right, and they have a pair of pedipalps adapted for biting and poisoning prey. Right, so these things, you can see, right? You zoom in. So here, then you've got the crustaceans, which include crabs, right? Lobsters and all that, and woodlouse. They have five or more pairs of limbs, and you can see that they're not saying legs, they're saying limbs, right? Because these guys tend to have claws, right? Not exactly legs. So crustacean, right? Like a lobster. Those claws are part of the limbs, right? The body is divided into the cephalothorax, which combines the head and thorax, and the abdomen, so two segments, two pairs of antennae, right? So that's four in total, one pair of compound eyes, and an exoskeleton often forms a hard covering over most of the body. So if you've ever seen a crab or a lobster, right, they have a hard coating, so that's the exoskeleton. And finally, you've got myriapods. So those are the centipedes and the millipedes. They have 10 or more pairs of legs, usually one pair per segment, right? So they have as many segments of the body as they have pairs of legs, usually. Body not obviously divided into thorax and abdomen because they've got all these segments. So the image they've given over here of a myriapod, right? This appears to be a millipede, right? They have a pair of antennae, they have simple eyes, and no other features such as wings or exoskeleton. So that's for the right arthropods in general in the kingdom Animalia. Right, these are in general all of these four categories are called arthropods. Then similarly, right, I'm going to sort of skip all this textual detail and go to the summarized table over here. And so for vertebrates, you've got these 5 different groups. First is the fish. They've got scales, mostly, right? They've got fins. They produce jelly-covered eggs in water. They have eyes, no ears, lateral line along the body for detecting vibrations in water, and they're cold-blooded and they use gills for breathing. Then you've got the amphibia, so right, something like frogs and toads and newts. They've got moist skin, no scales, right? They have 4 limbs and webbed feet. They also produce jelly-covered eggs in water. They have ears and eyes, and they're also cold-blooded, but they use lungs and the skin for breathing. So you can see that there are certain similarities, but then there are lots of other differences, right? And so these are called classes of vertebrates, right? So you've got kingdom, phylum, class. There's also domain, I believe, right? And then genus and species. So kingdom Animalia, and then you've got vertebrate, and then the class of vertebrate is the fish or the amphibia. The reptiles are examples are lizards and snakes, right? So they've got dry skin with scales, right? So they've got scales, so that's similar to fish, but it's dry skin. Obviously, fish are moist, wet. They, except for snakes, they have 4 legs, right? So snakes are the exception in that category. They produce eggs with a rubbery waterproof shell on land. Right, so it's not jelly covered, it's not in water. They have eyes and ears, and they too are cold blooded, but they use lungs for breathing. They do not use the skin, no gills. Then you've got birds, they have feathers and scales on their legs. They have 2 wings and 2 legs. They produce eggs with a hard shell. They lay eggs on land, right? So even if it's up on a tree, it's land because it's not in the water, right? They have eyes and ears, and they're warm-blooded. They have lungs for breathing, and they have beaks instead of mouths. And finally are the mammals. They have fur, 4 limbs. Again, we're saying limbs because we don't just have legs, we've got hands as well, right? Front limbs, right? However, like depends. Because mammals is a general category. They produce live young, right? So no external eggs for us. Eyes, ears with a pinna, so an external flap, so we can see our ears, right? We're warm-blooded. Well, I say we, but we're talking about mammals, so right, even the cats and other mammals. So warm-blooded, lungs for breathing. Females have mammary glands, and that's basically why, right, they're called mammals. Females having mammary glands and producing milk to feed their young. And the hair, right? So the fur. So those are 2 things that make mammals mammals. And they've got 4 types of teeth, right? So the canines, the incisors, the molars, and the premolars, right? So that is basically everything they've explained in the text, summarized, very helpful. Then the 5 kingdom scheme, so I already mentioned that, right? You've got the animals, plants, fungus, prokaryote, and protoctist. Viruses don't really fall into any kingdom, right? And they mentioned that this kind of problem is always occur because, right, this is a classification that we're coming up with based on what we're able to study, right? And obviously our information is incomplete. And so we're always going to have problems like this, like, oh, viruses, what do we do with them? All right, the plant kingdom. So we've got the plant kingdom, the prokaryote, the prototists, and finally the viruses. So the plant kingdom, right, a bit of detail here. So plants are made up of many cells, right? They're multicellular, they have a cell wall made of cellulose, right? They have chloroplasts for photosynthesis, they make their own food. And then there are basically two groups of plants, right? You've got the ferns and the flowering plants. So these are examples of flowering plants, and within flowering plants, we've got monocotyledons and dicotyledons. So first, let's talk about ferns. So ferns are land plants with well-developed structures. The stems, leaves, and roots are very similar to those of flowering plants. The stem is usually completely below ground, right? In bracken, so that's a kind of fern you can see over here. Right, the stem grows horizontally below ground, sending up leaves at intervals. Roots grow directly from the stem, so you will have like roots hanging from below ground coming out of the stem, and the only thing you'll be able to see above ground are the leaves. The stem and leaves have sieve tubes and water conducting cells, and right, so stuff that we've learned. Obviously, right, we've gone ahead and then come back, so we're familiar with this stuff. And the leaves of the ferns vary from one species to another, but they are several cells thick. Most of them have an upper and lower epidermis, a layer of parasitic and spongy cells, like the leaves of flowering plants. Okay.
And
For
are
yeah,
they monocotyledons?
could you repeat that?
Are they monocotyledons?
The monocot doesn't apply to ferns. It applies to flowering plants,
Okay.
right? So we know that flowering plants have pollen, and those are the gametes, and then the eggs are in the ovary of the female flower, right? So that's what happens in flowering plants, right? And we'll talk, like, if we get the chance with the classes we have left, we'll talk about reproduction. But what do the ferns have, right? So they're not flowering, so how do they reproduce? So ferns produce gametes but no seeds, right? The zygote gives rise to the fern plant, which then produces single-celled spores from many sporangia. So those are spore capsules on its leaves, right? So this is happening on the leaf itself. The sporangia are formed on the lower side of the leaf, but their position depends on the species of fern, right? They are usually arranged in compact groups. So figure 2.29. So over here, right? Each brown patch on the underside of the leaf is made up of many sporangia, right? And so they produce gametes like these directly. They might fall, right? Some ferns, right? The offspring starts growing on the leaf itself, and then it becomes big. It falls into the soil and becomes its own plant. In other cases, the spore capsules will fall into the soil and then start growing as, right, new plants. All right, flowering plants. Flowering plants reproduce by seeds that are formed in flowers. Right, so obviously the gametes coming from the pollen. So that's the male gamete, containing the male gamete, not the pollen itself is not the main gamete, but contains the male gamete. And then, right, it goes into the ovary where the eggs are, and those combine, they fertilize, and right, the flower becomes a fruit, and the fruit contains the seeds, which, right, are, you know, help propagate the plant. So the seeds are enclosed in an ovary. The general structure of a flowering plant is described in chapter 7. Right? Examples are shown in figure 2.26. So going back, right? These guys, We've got daffodils and poppies and geraniums, right, palm oil and all of this. Forget me not. Interesting. So flowering plants are divided into two subclasses, the monocotyledons and dicotyledons. Monocotyledons are also called monocots for short, are flowering plants that have only one cotyledon in their seed. Now, what is that? A cotyledon is an embryonic leaf which often contains food stores. Most but not all monocots also have long, narrow leaves like grasses, daffodils, right? Wheat, for example, right? So this is what they look like, monocots, right? So it's coming from whether they have one or two embryonic leaves. All right, the dicotyledons or dicots usually have two cotyledons in the seeds. Their leaves are usually broader, as you can see, and they've got a network of veins, branching veins in the leaf. Right, and so those are the key features. Right, along with the leaf shape and stuff. Right, groups of flowers. So monocots have groups of threes, whereas dicots have groups of five for the different flowering parts, petals, sepals, and the carpels. Then you've got fungi. Right, most fungi are made up of thread-like hyphae. So like this, you probably can't see this because it's microscopic. Right, rather than cells. So they don't have cells like what we studied so far. And there are many nuclei scattered throughout the cytoplasm in the hyphae, right? So this entire thread-like structure, many nuclei all over the place, right? They don't have distinct cells, they don't have distinct compartments. You can see over here, right? Nucleus, 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 vacuoles and glycogen granules, and so they release enzymes to the external environment on whatever they're growing, they digest it, and then they absorb the digested material back in. So the fungi include organisms such as mushrooms. So mushrooms are fungi, toadstools, puffballs, and the bracket fungus that is growing. So this picture over here is a bracket fungus, right? You can only see the right sort of bracket part, which is the reproductive structure. They also have the mycelium, which is the network of hyphae, which is growing inside the trunk, and it's eating the tree from the inside, and the tree will die. So they also have less obvious but very important. They're also the less obvious but the very important mole fungi, which grow on stale bread, cheese, fruit, and other food. Right? Many of the mold fungi live in the soil or in dead wood. Yeast are a single-celled fungi that have some features similar to molds. Some fungal species are parasites, right? Parasites meaning that they feed on the host to grow and obviously cause harm to the host. A parasite is an organism living on another organism, gaining food and shelter from it. It is a very one-sided relationship, right? So the parasite gains, the host is obviously being affected negatively. Fungal parasites live in other organisms, particularly plants, where they cause diseases that can affect crop plants such as mildew, right, shown in 2.34. So like this. So we've covered the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, then we have the prokaryote, which is bacteria and blue-green algae. They consist of single cells but are different from other single cell organisms because their chromosomes are not inside a proper nucleus. So they do not have a nuclear ending. Right? And then other details of our bacteria we've done in chapter 1. So you can refer back to that. Then you've got the protoctist kingdom. So these are single-celled meaning unicellular organisms, which have their chromosomes enclosed in a nuclear membrane to form a nucleus. Right, and some examples are given in figure 2.35. So you have the amoeba, right, and all these other guys, right? They're all protoctist. And then the plasmodium that we've studied for the which causes malaria, that's also a protoctist. Right, some of the protoctists have chloroplasts and make their food by photosynthesis. These are often referred to, sorry, the protoctista are often referred to as unicellular. Organisms like the amoeba and the paramecium take in and digest solid food and so are animal-like, right? So they don't make their own food; they feed on external, sources, and they may be called unicellular animals. You can see animals given in inverted commas. The amoeba is a protozoan that moves by a flowing movement of its cytoplasm. So it doesn't have flagella or stuff like bacteria. The cytoplasm flows and that causes the amoeba to flow. It feeds by picking up bacteria and other microscopic organisms as it moves, right? So one microorganism feeding off another microorganism, and obviously these guys can infect larger hosts as well, right? Multicellular organisms. Vorticella has a stalk that can contract and feeds by making a current of water with its cilia, right? The cilia, as we know, are tiny hair-like organelles which project from the surface. The current brings particles of food to the cell. Euglena, I believe, and Calmidomonas, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, have chloroplasts in their cells and feed like plants by photosynthesis, right? So just some information about different types of protoctists. And finally, the virus. There are many different types. They vary in their shape and structure, and they have a central core which contains either RNA or DNA. It's surrounded by a protein coat. They don't have a nucleus, no cytoplasm, no organelles, no membrane, right? Although some may have a membrane outside of the protein, right? Virus particles are not cells because they don't have any features of the cell. They do not feed, they do not respire, they do not excrete, they do not grow, and right, they're generally, I mean, it's argued whether they can be called living or not. They do reproduce, but only inside host cells, right, which are living, and they also well, and that then to the used materials provided by the host cell, right? So they're not doing anything of their own. So looking at this diagram, right, some features, you've got the genetic material could be DNA or RNA, right? You've got the protein coat, which is called the capsid, and the individual protein molecules are called the capsomeres, right? So stuff that you need to remember. They might ask you to label them or
What's
so.
capsular?
Hmm?
What's capsulars?
Capsomeres are the individual protein units that join together to make the protein coat. So the coat
Okay.
is called the capsid. Individual protein units of the capsid, the coat, are called capsomeres. Okay.
Yes.
And I believe that is the end of the chapter. Yes. Any questions?
No.
All right. So tomorrow we will jump forward to chapter 19, right? So we're kind of skipping for the time being. Definitely, we won't be able to complete it. Maybe I can offer a summary of these two chapters, a very concise overview of chapter 16 and 17. Tomorrow we'll look at chapter 19, relationship of organisms with one another and in the environment, and this too will have to be summarized, right? So all the concepts and some of the things, right, I'll leave to read. So yeah, as you can see, it's a pretty lengthy chapter. Honestly, I don't know if we'll be able to cover all of it tomorrow. But let's see how it goes. All right. So I'll see you next time, Michelle.
Happy.